Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a side of medieval history you probably didn't learn in school: the secrets, scandals, and shocking stories of queens who broke every rule of their time. Forget the fairy tales about noble ladies waiting in castle towers. These were women who plotted coups, outsmarted kings, defied the church, and lived lives filled with passion, danger, and intrigue. Get ready, because this is the most scandalous queens in medieval history, and more. Throughout history, the Middle Ages have often been portrayed as a time of chivalry, knights in shining armor, and noble ladies waiting in castle towers. But behind the high stone walls of medieval castles, away from the pomp and pageantry, there were stories that the chroniclers could barely whisper and the priests condemned from their pulpits. These were tales of passion, betrayal, ambition, and scandal. And at the center of some of the most jaw-dropping episodes stood queens whose lives defied every rule of propriety. They were women who, by the standards of their time, lived dangerously, challenging the church, manipulating the politics of entire kingdoms, and engaging in love affairs that would shake the courts to their core. One of the earliest and most infamous examples comes from France. Meet Isabella of France, often called the She-Wolf of France. Born a princess, married to King Edward II of England, Isabella found herself trapped in a marriage with a ruler who openly favored male courtiers over his wife. While Edward lavished titles and wealth on his favorites, men like Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser, Isabella was sidelined. But she was not a woman to be quietly ignored. In a shocking twist, she allied herself with her lover, Roger Mortimer, and launched an invasion of England in 1326. The result? Edward II was deposed and likely murdered under mysterious circumstances, and Isabella and Mortimer ruled England in the young King Edward III's name. It was a real-life medieval coup, and it made Isabella one of the most scandalous figures of her age. Moving north, we find another queen whose name is still whispered in Scandinavian history: Margaret of Denmark, known not just for her political acumen, but for the rumors surrounding her personal life. Margaret ruled the Kalmar Union, a political alliance of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, with an iron hand. While she is remembered for uniting the Scandinavian kingdoms, chroniclers of the time gossiped about her alleged romantic entanglements with powerful nobles, suggesting that her charm and wit were just as formidable as her sword-wielding knights. Whether the stories were exaggerated by her political enemies or not, they cemented her image as a woman who could command armies by day and seduce diplomats by night. Not all scandal came from affairs of the heart. Some came from the sheer audacity to wield power in a world where women were expected to be silent. Take Eleanor of Aquitaine, for example. She was married first to King Louis VII of France and later to King Henry II of England, making her queen of two of the most powerful kingdoms of medieval Europe. Eleanor's life was a whirlwind of political intrigue and personal drama. She was rumored to have had affairs during the Second Crusade, and her open defiance of her husband Henry eventually led to her imprisonment for over a decade. Yet she emerged from captivity as a political powerhouse, helping her sons, including Richard the Lionheart, to shape the destiny of England. Her boldness and refusal to conform made her both admired and feared. As we travel further east, the Byzantine Empire offers its own stories of scandalous queens, or rather, empresses. Theodora, wife of Emperor Justinian I, began her life far from the throne. According to historian Procopius, she worked as an actress and courtesan before catching Justinian's eye. Their marriage shocked the court, but Theodora quickly proved herself a shrewd and capable ruler, influencing imperial policy, and even defying her husband on key issues. Though some of the most salacious stories about her come from hostile sources, her rise from a life on the margins to the heights of imperial power remains one of the most dramatic tales in history. And then there is Joanna I of Naples, whose reign was marked by both tragedy and scandal. Accused of orchestrating the murder of her first husband, Andrew of Hungary, Joanna faced years of political instability and gossip. She married 4 times, each union stirring new rumors about her ambitions and desires. Despite the turmoil, she managed to keep her throne for decades, a testament to her resilience and political skill. Yet the shadow of those early accusations never left her, and to this day, historians debate whether she was a cold-blooded murderer or simply a victim of courtly intrigue. In these stories, we see that the label scandalous was often as much a political weapon as a moral judgment. Many of these queens were vilified not simply because of their personal lives, but because they dared to play the political game as ruthlessly as the men around them. Their enemies used gossip as a sword, painting them as seductresses, schemers, or worse, in order to undermine their authority. Yet in doing so, they inadvertently ensured that these women would be remembered, not as footnotes, but as central figures in the grand, messy, and thrilling saga of medieval history. If you thought the first part was wild, get ready, because the stories we're about to uncover are filled with even more intrigue, betrayal, and jaw-dropping moments that define the lives of medieval queens. These women weren't content to simply sit on a throne and smile for portraits. They were strategists, warriors, and at times, master manipulators. Whether their reputations were earned or unjustly crafted by their enemies, the result is the same. They left behind legacies steeped in drama. Let's begin in England once again, with the fiery and controversial Anne Boleyn. Though technically a Tudor queen of the early modern era rather than the Middle Ages, her rise and fall still echo the same patterns of scandal and power that medieval queens faced. Anne caught the eye of King Henry VIII, captivating him so thoroughly that he broke with the Catholic Church to make her his wife. But the same passion that elevated her to the throne also fueled her enemies. Accusations of adultery, witchcraft, and even incest with her own brother swirled around her court, fueled by political rivals and Henry's growing frustration over her failure to produce a male heir. In 1536, she was executed at the Tower of London, a grim reminder that even queens were not safe when their power threatened those around them. Traveling to Eastern Europe, we encounter Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess of Hungary. Though her life straddles the late medieval and early modern periods, the legends about her are drenched in Gothic horror. According to tales, many likely exaggerated or entirely fabricated by her political adversaries, she tortured and killed hundreds of young girls, even bathing in their blood to preserve her youth. While historians now debate the accuracy of these claims, there's no denying that Elizabeth's name became synonymous with female cruelty and decadence. She was eventually imprisoned for life in her own castle, where she died in isolation, her legend growing darker with each retelling. But not all scandal was about blood and betrayal. Sometimes it was about ambition and brilliance that simply didn't fit into the expected mold of a queen. Take Catherine de' Medici of France. Married to King Henry II, she wielded enormous influence over 3 of her sons who each became king. Catherine was accused of poisoning rivals, manipulating court politics, and orchestrating the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Her enemies painted her as a scheming Italian enchantress, a woman whose power was unnatural and dangerous. In truth, she was a master of survival in one of the most dangerous courts in Europe, using every tool at her disposal, including her sharp mind and her deep knowledge of human nature. In Spain, Joanna of Castile, better known as Joanna the Mad, presents another fascinating blend of myth and reality. Married to Philip the Handsome, Joanna's life was marked by political turbulence and deep personal tragedy. After Philip's sudden death, her grief was so intense that she was said to have kept his body close for years, traveling with his coffin and refusing to bury him. Whether this was genuine madness or a political ploy by her father and son to strip her of power remains a subject of debate. What's certain is that Joanna spent nearly 50 years confined in a convent, her reputation as a mad queen overshadowing her rightful place as the ruler of Castile. Let's not forget Marguerite of Burgundy, whose story is part of the infamous affair of the Tour de Nesle. In the early 14th century, this scandal shook the French monarchy when it was revealed that Marguerite and her sister-in-law allegedly engaged in affairs with 2 knights. The discovery led to public trials, executions, and the imprisonment of the queens involved. Marguerite herself died under mysterious circumstances while imprisoned, perhaps murdered, perhaps left to waste away in the harsh conditions of her cell. The incident not only tarnished the women's reputations, but also had far-reaching consequences for the French line of succession. Crossing over to the Crusader states in the Middle East, we meet Sibylla of Jerusalem, a queen whose reign was defined by war, political strife, and personal scandal. As the sister of King Baldwin IV, the Leper King, Sibylla became queen after his death, marrying Guy of Lusignan. Her decision to marry Guy was deeply unpopular among the nobility, sparking divisions that weakened the kingdom just as the Muslim leader Saladin was preparing his campaign. The fall of Jerusalem in 1187 was a devastating blow, and Sibylla's reign is often remembered for the political infighting that helped lead to the loss of the city. These queens, like those we discussed earlier, were often caught in the crossfire of politics, rumor, and ambition. In many cases, their so-called scandals were less about moral failings and more about the threat they posed to the male-dominated structures of power. History, after all, is written by the victors, and in the Middle Ages, the victors were almost always men. A powerful woman could be celebrated as a saint one day and condemned as a sinner the next, depending on who held the quill. We've already uncovered tales of passion, treachery, and ambition that would rival even the most dramatic TV series. But we're not done yet. In this final chapter, we'll meet more queens whose names became immortal in whispers, court records, and scandalous chronicles. Some were victims of ruthless propaganda. Others embraced the chaos and played the dangerous game of power to the very end. Let's journey first to Scotland, where we find Mary, Queen of Scots, a woman whose life was a tragic blend of romance, betrayal, and political disaster. Married at 16 to the Dauphin of France, she was widowed before she was 20, returning to Scotland to rule a kingdom torn by religious division. Her second marriage, to Lord Darnley, quickly soured, and when he was mysteriously murdered, suspicion fell on Mary herself. Her swift marriage to the chief suspect, the Earl of Bothwell, ignited outrage among her subjects. Forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, Mary fled to England, seeking protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. Instead, she spent 19 years in captivity before being executed for allegedly plotting to assassinate Elizabeth. Her tragic end has inspired poets, playwrights, and historians for centuries. In Italy, we meet Joanna I of Naples, a queen whose reign was marred by constant intrigue and war. Known for her beauty, intelligence, and political cunning, Joanna was accused of murdering her first husband, Andrew of Hungary, to protect her own authority. Whether she was guilty remains uncertain, but the accusation provided her enemies with the perfect excuse to challenge her rule. She spent much of her life defending her throne against rivals and foreign invaders, eventually being captured and strangled to death in 1382. A grim fate for a woman who had fought so fiercely for her kingdom. From the courts of Italy, we move to the exotic and perilous world of the Byzantine Empire, where Theodora rose from humble beginnings, possibly even working as an actress and courtesan, to become the wife and co-ruler of Emperor Justinian I. Theodora was both adored and despised. Her enemies never forgot her origins, and rumors of her scandalous youth persisted throughout her reign. Yet she was a formidable leader, known for her intelligence, political acumen, and fierce defense of women's rights. During the Nika riots, when Justinian considered fleeing the city, it was Theodora who convinced him to stand his ground, ultimately saving the empire. Her life proves that scandal doesn't always destroy, sometimes it builds legends. Heading north again, we encounter Isabella of France, the she-wolf of France, who became Queen of England as the wife of Edward II. Their marriage was a political alliance gone sour, with Edward's open favoritism toward his male companions alienating Isabella and much of the nobility. In 1326, Isabella joined forces with her lover, Roger Mortimer, to invade England, overthrow her husband, and install her young son, Edward III, as king. For a time, Isabella and Mortimer ruled as the power behind the throne, until Edward III seized control and had Mortimer executed. Isabella lived out her final years in comfort, but her reputation as a scheming and dangerous queen endured for centuries. We must also mention Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most remarkable women of the medieval period. Queen of both France and England at different points in her life, Eleanor was a patron of the arts, a political strategist, and in the eyes of some, a dangerously independent woman. She accompanied her first husband, Louis VII of France, on the Second Crusade, where rumors spread about her close relationship with her uncle, Raymond of Antioch. Later, she married Henry II of England and played a central role in her son's rebellion against him. Though imprisoned for years by Henry, Eleanor returned to political prominence after his death, helping to shape the reigns of her sons Richard the Lionheart and King John. Before we conclude, let's not forget the queens whose scandals were more about survival than vice. Many medieval queens faced the constant threat of being cast aside, poisoned, or politically erased if they failed to produce heirs or challenge powerful factions. Often, what history calls immorality was simply a refusal to conform to the submissive role expected of them. Their so-called sins were often acts of resistance, whether that meant choosing their own lovers, funding rebellions, or daring to speak their minds in court. And so, as we wrap up this deep dive into the most scandalous queens in medieval history and beyond, one thing becomes clear. Scandal is rarely just about personal morality. More often, it's about the clash between power and expectation, between what society demanded of women and what they demanded for themselves. For every queen accused of adultery, witchcraft, or cruelty, there is another story, one of survival, strategy, and the refusal to be erased from history. Thank you for joining me on this wild historical ride. If you enjoyed uncovering these untold stories of ambition, betrayal, and resilience, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating figures, and let me know in the comments which queen's story shocked you the most. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, history is never as simple as it seems.